talk about this, Jim Dubea, got the name right? Okay. Since joining TranSystems, Jim has been successful in leading very complex intermodal developments, port master planning projects, and multiple transportation-related infrastructure ventures. He's a trusted advisor throughout the maritime and intermodal industry, actively works with clients identifying and applying for federal grant opportunities. He's the go-to guy for the federal grants, okay? He's successful in assisting clients with local and state municipality partnerships in the preparation and submittal of competitive federal grant applications. Jim also leads and manages a variety of maritime and intermodal-related infrastructure projects throughout the country and works with multiple state DOTs to assist with the federal grant application process. Fun fact, he's previously served over 22 years in the U.S. Coast Guard, culminating his service as base commander in Port Canaveral, one of my favorite places to go visit to look at space shots. He then spent 5 years as deputy executive director of the Canaveral Port Authority. So please welcome Jim Dubea.
There you go. Thank you. Kind introduction. Thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon. Quick, before I get started, how many in the audience have actually applied for a federal grant or been part of a federal grant application process? Okay, so we've got a few. It's good. So I'm not going to be talking a different language to some of you, at least. What I'm going to do is kind of go through. I've only got about a half hour, so I've got to keep this kind of high level. These things get very detailed. So I'm going to go through the purpose, identify the overview and basics, kind of like a marketing plan that we came up with called the 4 Ps of a winning grant application, and then go through some expectations. Then once you get to an award, what you can expect, and then some resources that are available for you if you do want to seek some of the federal grant opportunities out there. So the purpose of the session is basically to raise the awareness that these federal grants are out there, help you identify projects, and then help you come up with a winning strategy on how to go after these projects or how to go after these grants. Here's some of the grants. Now, this is not an all-encompassing list. These are just the ones that I'm going to cover in this presentation. All of them have acronyms. So the first one's DIRA, which is the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act. That's actually out of the EPA. The Advanced Transportation and Congestion Management Technologies, that applies to any type of electronic type of activity, whether it's a grade crossing or other type of advanced technologies. Build, which used to be Tiger, it's now better utilizing investments to leverage development. Probably some of the ones that you guys, CRISI is the critical rail infrastructure and safety improvements. Infra, which is the infrastructure for rebuilding America, which has actually just came out, and it's due in, I think, February 24th. And the Port Infrastructure Development Projects. That's a new grant program that just came out last year. It's actually came out of the Maritime Administration, but it does service intermodal activities. So first, DIRA, basically if you have a diesel engine and you have a need to improve that technology to where it's going to reduce emissions. DIRA is an application process that you can go through. Typical, it's already out this year. It's due in, I think, February 26th. It's about a $25 million or $44 million pot of money, and we've got about, depending on your EPA region, which is outlined here, typically California gets the majority of these for obvious reasons, but it's actually set up to where if you're in an area that has poor air quality as identified by the EPA, you have a higher likelihood of achieving these grants. So some of the basics, like I said, a diesel engine, any kind of equipment, buses, heavy duty, highway vehicles, marine engines, locomotives, and non-road engines. Anything that basically emits carbon, you can use these grants. The Advanced Transportation and Congestion Management Technology, now this is one that would apply to railroads as well. As you look at it, there's about $60 million that was out last year. They have not come out with the NOFO, which is the Notice of Funding Opportunity. The acronym is NOFO. So last year was about 60 million. We are hearing that it's probably going to be about the same, $60 million this year. And what this goes towards is development of deployment sites for large-scale installation of operation of advanced technologies. So advanced warning systems, advanced transportation management systems, you can kind of see the list here. Anything that deals with a high-tech system that is going to improve the transportation network, this grant is applicable. Build is, like I said, it used to be Tiger. Again, it's just been rebranded for this administration. This is one that's been around for a while. It's actually just come out. It is funded $1 billion this year. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, and I think Jim had mentioned this earlier in your presentation, this is an election year. Typically, these grants come staggered throughout the federal fiscal year. This year, all of these grants will be coming out within the next 60 to 90 days, and they will all be awarded before October 16th, which we all saw what that date is. So that's the plan for the administration this year. Typically, they would kind of stagger these grants throughout the year so that it didn't kind of overload the DOT process. So this year, we expect the notice of funding opportunity to come out in a day now. We've heard it may even be out this week, possibly next week, with about a 60-day turnaround for when the actual grant application will be due. Again, I said it's about $1 billion. The minimum award is $5 million or $1 million for rural. Maximum award can be $25 million. Maximum also is about $90 million per state. So it's purposely meant to be spread out across the U.S. There is a cost share, 80%, but if you're in a rural community or if you have a direct impact on a rural community, you could be funded at 100%. This is kind of the guidelines for build. It's road bridge projects, public transportation projects, passenger and freight rail, port infrastructure investments, and also intermodal projects. So it's kind of the catch-all for all infrastructure. One that probably most of you are familiar with in here, and this one is a little bit different. All of the other grants that I had been talking about, as far as being eligible, you have to actually be a political subdivision of a state, or you have to be a governing body to actually apply for those federal grants. CRISI is the only example, or the only exception, where you can be a Class 1, 2, or 3 railroad. You can also be a nonprofit that could actually make an application. So there's a lot of caveats, but CRISI is specifically designated for railroad, $330 million this year, cost share up to 80%. Rural projects, 25% of the funding is reserved, so I think that's about $82 million is going to be specifically for rural projects out of that $330 million. And here's what the eligible projects, and this is not an all-inclusive list. This is high level just to get the points across. But it's for ridership growth, rail line relocation, safety programs, research, track station equipment. There's a lot of opportunity within the CRISI rail, and CRISI is also one that will actually fund a planning or environmental analysis or a feasibility analysis. They have what's called 4 tracks of funding within the CRISI grant application. A lot of the other grant programs, they do not necessarily, they do have planning grants set aside, but this administration has not awarded one planning grant. They really want to build infrastructure. So CRISI does have, I think it's track 1, it's actually for feasibility and environmental impacts. Big one is the Infra, which is also going to be $1 billion this year, and it's the infrastructure for rebuilding America. 90% of that funding is going to go to large projects, which is a $25 million and above price tag. Then 10% is going to be small projects, which is at $5 million and below. So what's interesting about Infra is that it's very similar to Build. It covers all infrastructure projects, roads, bridges, rail lines, and again, the grant cycle, I've got February to May, but it's actually out right now, and it is due the end of February. And what's neat about this picture, we actually helped a client with this, and this is actually in our backyard. This is a picture of a bridge. They just were awarded a $90 million Infra grant last year. And that's to rebuild a bridge that was actually previously owned by NASA in the state of Florida. NASA built it during the original 1960 space program. They had always been trying to get the Florida DOT to take the bridge over, but the bridge is deficient, no cathodic protection. It's lost its load rating. So the Florida DOT did not want to take a $200 million project from the federal government. So enter Space Florida, which is a political subdivision of the state of Florida, which is their business development for commercial aerospace. They need that bridge for companies like Blue Origin, SpaceX. You guys may have heard of them. They're playing around in the rocket game a little bit. So they cannot move their rockets from the mainland where their manufacturing facilities are over and to where the launch facilities are because this bridge is so deficient. So we actually worked with the client, came up with a strategy, actually had NASA, Florida DOT, and Space Florida all come up with an agreement and a cost share where we submitted the application where NASA actually funded about $30 million out of their project, out of their funds, then also had a land swap that they were going to do at Space Florida. Florida DOT was coming up with $30 million as well, and then the other $90 million was coming from the feds. And the bridge is, they're negotiating the terms right now, and the bridge should be rebuilt here pretty soon. And again, just back to the infra basics, eligible projects, anything that moves, any kind of transportation. The only thing that a lot of these grants do not cover, they won't touch anything on airport property. So if it's a train going to an airport property, those projects have been funded in the past, but it will stop at the boundary. They won't fund anything past the airport property. And that has to be kind of clearly annotated in any kind of application process. Port infrastructure development. Now, this is the brainchild of, there's another association called the American Association of Port Authorities. We lobbied very hard to get a dedicated port-related infrastructure development plan or grant process. So this is kind of the brainchild of a lot of hard work with all the ports in our lobbying efforts. Because in the CRISI infra build, it was very hard for ports to get the appropriate recognition on a national scale when you're competing with DOTs and other private infrastructure. So the Port Infrastructure Development Project came out, or a grant program came out. It actually funds about $225 million this year. Last year was about $200 million, but it had $92 million earmarked for the top 15 container ports in the U.S. So they did a real good job of lobbying to get that $92 million added in there. The minimum award is $10 million, and it also goes to fund projects and boundaries within a coastal seaport, including roads, bridges, berth improvements, even dredging if it's for berth, not for a channel. And then also cargo movement equipment, facilities, utilities, port-related, intelligent transportation and systems. So anything on a port that could be used to enhance the infrastructure. So those are just kind of a high level on some of these, on the grant applications. Now we're going to talk about kind of the 4 Ps, which is kind of our marketing term that we use on how to market. So you have identified, prioritize, prepare, present, and promote. That's kind of our marketing plan for, okay, you've identified a grant. Now how do you get that thing through to completion? And it's kind of, this year it's kind of hard. I've heard that they're going to be around for the foreseeable future. Some of them may change, but I think infrastructure grants are going to be around for the foreseeable future. I know there's some there's some politics in DC that have to happen, but there is a need for this to continue on in the industry. So prioritize is actually before the notice of funding opportunity comes out. These things don't change every year. They've been around for about 8 years now. They have not changed significantly. Some little details may change, but the overall meat of the notice of funding opportunity, it relatively stays the same. So before that comes out, and back to my schedule where I talked about how they usually came out throughout the year, this year it's a little bit more condensed, but still that's a great opportunity because I'm going to talk later about how you promote and get in front of the right DOT people so that your project rises to the top. Because this year they're going to be under a lot of pressure to get a lot of grants out the door in a very short period of time. So you want to identify the project before the notice of funding comes out based off the previous notice of funding. Then you go through your best project selection, you get all your data, you write your grant, you submit your grant. While you're doing that, before you submit, you need to make at least 2 or 3 trips to USDOT, okay? You don't go ask your rich uncle for money without ever talking to him and seeing him face to face, right? So when you're going, you need to go up there, physically go, make an appointment, don't have your lobbyist do it, but you need to take ownership of the project, go up there, talk to the actual USDOT people that are going to be working the project, and I'll go through that later in the slideshow as well to kind of show you how that works. And then once you submit your grant, regardless of the project and which grant you apply for, there's a cone of silence as soon as you press submit. So you need to get all your strategic marketing and in front of the right people before you actually press submit, because they will talk to you and give you answers. They'll sit there and go over your grant with you if you invest the time and tell you, yes, no, oh, you should change this, maybe you shouldn't say that. They'll do that with you, and you need to take advantage of that. Once you submit it, you cannot go back and talk to them. You have to wait until the decision's made. But what's great about that is now elected and public support. That's when you have your congressional and your local, regional, political get involved. They can make inquiries and talk and market that thing for you. So when you're going in through your grant, you want to make sure it aligns with the merit selection criteria. In a notice of funding opportunity, it's going to list what the merit selection criteria is. Just like, a 5th grade report, whenever your teacher said you needed to cover this, 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 and this, same concept. They lay exactly what you need to cover, and you need to follow the guidelines that they've outlined. You need to make sure that the benefits exceed the cost, so you can't have a $200 million project that's got no public benefit. And you've got to have strong public support. You absolutely have to have the region supporting your efforts. So going back to the application format, this is primarily what it looks like. You've got a project description, location, parties, grant fund sources and uses, merit selection criteria, and project readiness. Project readiness is a key because, again, there's a twilight period on this money. So if you do get selected, your funding needs to be allocated within 24 months, so that's 2 years, and then you have to be expended by 5 years. So if you've got a project that you're just thinking about, but it's not NEPA ready, they need to be shovel ready, which we've heard that term being thrown around. That's the most highly desirable projects, the ones that have gone through all the preliminary, they're ready to be built. And then for some of the grants, depending on which ones, the first two, the ADS and ATCMD, does not require what's called a benefit cost analysis. So the BCA is actually a separate document that's an appendix to your grant application. And basically what that does is it outlines the financial reasons why this grant and why your project is feasible and why it makes sense on the financial side. So the benefit cost analysis is highly important. Then you've also got your letter and supporting comments and supplemental information if needed. So your letters, and what a lot of people do, they'll do one letter and they'll just send it out to, the Chamber of Commerce, to EDC, this, and, every other nonprofit or other support agencies. They'll print that exact thing, they'll sign it and put it on their letterhead and send it back. DOT does not like to see that. They want to see personalized letters. So to as much to your possible, you really want to, you can give an example, but you really need to ask, and everybody's busy, I got it, I understand. You really want to make sure that they take some time and write a personal letter that is actually relevant to their industry, because DOT does actually read every single one of them. And when they're going through an application and the last 20 pages is the same letter on different letterhead, it doesn't, that's the last thing they're going to look at when they put your grant down. So the one that's going to stand out is the one that has 20 very different sincere letters that have been written by 20 different agencies, signed by 20 different, and written 20 different ways. So that's going to resonate a little bit more with the project being reviewed, or the review team. So this is just a little bit more in the weeds with the benefit cost analysis. They usually, depending on what in the notice of funding opportunity you'll say, it's usually a 20 to 30 year window. I think it's a 4% discount rate. I can't remember off the top of my head. I was looking at Sarah. She's not looking at me, so. But they actually give you all the guidelines that you need to use. And I want to say at the discount rate, they use a 20 or 30 year at a 4% discount rate. And then that will give you a net benefit or a net loss. Now, you need to have at least a 1. So 1-to-1 ratio is the minimum. Anything below a 1 means it's a bridge to nowhere with no relevant economic impacts. So you want to have something that's a little bit higher, or a benefit cost ratio above a 1. The Infra project that we put in, the benefit cost ratio was almost a 6, because there was no other bridge infrastructure, and for them to move their rockets, they would have had to go 2.5 miles around the Indian River Lagoon to actually get their rockets where they needed to go. So that actually enhanced that project with a 6 BCA, which was pretty influential. So again, what I was talking about is environmental readiness. You want to make sure that you've done your due diligence, whether it's an EA, an EIS, especially for complex projects, those take time. Now, if you've got a draft EIS, we've put several projects in with a draft EIS and they've been approved. So you don't have to go through but if you've got a draft EIS that's pretty much 99.9% done, where it's just, still needs a couple rubber stamps from the EPA, you can still put in for a federal grant, and usually by the time that grant is going through the process, your EIS will get your final approval. Some other things that need to be considered, obviously right-of-way support, economic development, capital investments, your state and local planning approval. A lot of these, it's part of the application process. They're going to ask if it's on the tip or the STIP for the state. And that answer needs to be yes. And it's not too hard if you're plugged in and you're doing your due diligence before you actually start the process. I know in a few states, and I know it's true here in Florida, in Texas, you just need to simply call your district and say, I need you to add this project to the tip or the STIP, and they do it. You may have to do them a favor, but for the most part, they will do that. But that is very important that you do have that project identified as part of the regional planning infrastructure. This is more of an administrative purpose. So to actually submit, you have to have a DUNS number. You have to go on grants.gov. You have to have an applicant that goes through this process. And again, this is part of the winning strategy. You're doing a great job. You get to this point where you got to submit, oh, we don't have anybody qualified. It's just a little nuance that you want to make sure that you're actually able and have the technical background to be an applicant before you go through the process. So again, whenever I was talking about strategy, you've got your grant. This is the evaluation selection process. Remember when I told you when you're in your draft stages, you've got probably a good marketing piece, you've got a summary of your grant, you want to go to USDOT and talk to some people? Just somebody ought to nod yes. Okay, you do remember, great. So these are the people you want to go talk to. You want to talk to all levels. Now, it's great, you may know Elaine Chow, you may have a distant cousin, that's all great, but these 5 intake and review committees need to approve it before it gets to Elaine Chow's desk, okay? So what we've been really successful in is making sure that our clients go early on, talk to the process intake team, the intake processing team, the technical review team, the economic analysis team. And some of that can be all in one meeting. It may have to be separate meetings, but you want to make sure that you go and you actually meet with each one of them. They understand your project. So there's no misunderstandings. So when that project does come through, oh, I remember talking to this guy or this young lady. Yeah, they were great. It was a great project. They go through it, they check it off, it moves into the A pile. Chances are, if you're not going to spend any time promoting your document, promoting your project, meeting with people on these teams, it's more of a crapshoot, okay? What I'm trying to do is make sure you guys understand the best strategy, and this has been kind of developed within our firm and people that we've been successful with. This is kind of the best strategy that we can come up with as far as how to be successful in the federal grant process. So once you submit your grant, it's in USDOT. Hopefully you're doing this in parallel with all the other operations that you're doing. You want to make sure that all your regional offices, congressional delegations, state and local officials, everybody's on board with this thing. You need to have a village of support for any one of these projects. You can't have one, maybe. You just need to have everybody in support, and it needs to be early and often is kind of the way we like to say it, to where by the time your grant application gets to USDOT, they've heard about it so many times. They know about it before they've even opened the book and read it. They have heard from congressional delegates. They've heard from Senate and congressional staffers. That's the best strategy you can probably get. And then these are hyperlinks. Obviously, you can't see, I can't click on them here, but these are some resources available that can help you guide you through the process. Also, I'm available as well. So if you've got any questions, I think I've got a few minutes. I think I finished right on time. The chat room. All right, I'm in the chat room. I've heard there's alcohol in there, so I'll see you in there.